I've been reflecting that Keizen Sambo over my shoulder here. There are three types of suffering, and the first is the pain of pain, which means pain that is simply ouch pain, that we experience as pain. And the second is the pain of change. And the third is the pervasive pain of being subject to afflictive emotions, the results of afflictive emotions, of being caught in cyclic existence. But there's a Nyingma reading of the first, which is really double pain. That you have one pain and you get another ouch pain, another ouch pain. So you have the prevalent virus, and on top of that you get smoke. And so I've been thinking, on top of smoke, you get, of course, something else too, and on top of that, you get something else. And on top of that, so it's not just double, it's on top of. So it's, I look on that teaching as, it's not the usual teaching that you get, double pain. I've thought of it often. Oh, here's another pain. It's one on top, another ouch pain. And usually I laugh. Here's one more, ha ha. And I've wondered how many, does it take 10 for me to keep laughing, and then on the 11th, I can't muster the energy to laugh, or I'm curled up in a corner. His Holiness said to an aged monk one day, we're monks. A monk who had gotten cancer and was disturbed. His Holiness said, he didn't lean forward, but it was like he was. He said, we're monks. Death is not a concern. And snapped him to where he should be. And, it's great. I happened to be there. If you, with some background, when we sink into some self-concern, self-lousy concern, we can be snapped. And it doesn't require leaning forward. You can remain as you are. And you don't have to, but I raised my voice. His Holiness didn't raise his voice. But there was, we're monks. We're not, we're not concerned. Well, that's fine with us. That's lovely. It's beautiful teaching for me. Don't get involved with your dipshit, shallow worries. Okay. So you'll have to remind me when the 11th pylon pain hits me and I go, oh shit, this is too much. So we're up to how the profound dependent arising is not realized. Not just dependent arising, but the profound dependent arising. Now, this is old stuff. So, we've been reading and thinking about this. As long as the two understanding of appearances, and Tsong-kha-pa himself explains what this means, that dependent arisings are non-delusive. And I've seen the value of the translation of non-delusive through our exploring last time, the various. I don't mean better value, but just that non-delusive works. Just as Geshe Wangyal's, what was his?
Infallible.
Infallible. So I understood how infallible worked last time. So non-delusive doesn't have to be a consciousness. It's yeah. And last time we mentioned that emptiness also appears. The fact that, well, it happens that emptiness is a dependent arising. But here, dependent arising, emptiness is not included within dependent arising, right? Because there's like dependent arisings on one side and emptiness on the other side. And understanding dependent arising promotes understanding of emptiness. Understanding of emptiness promotes understanding of dependent arising. So in this case, emptiness is not included within dependent arising, in this case, even though emptiness is a dependent arising. So if one wants to play around a little, is uncompounded space included within dependent arising? It's uncompounded space is a permanent phenomenon. Well, okay, fine to include it as far as I'm concerned. An understanding of emptiness, that it is devoid of assertion. Well, the commentary very nicely explains this. Otherwise, a dumb reaction would be, oh yeah, you couldn't say anything about emptiness. Whereas we've said a whole lot about emptiness. So that's going to have to be explained. There are a whole lot of assertions about emptiness. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. Emptiness is only an absence of inherent existence. Then what is inherent existence? What are the hypothetical synonyms of inherent existence? Why do we say hypothetical? Because inherent existence never did, nor never will, nor never did, does, or will exist. So thus hypothetical. On and on and on. And somebody even wrote a 1,000-page book called Meditation on Emptiness, which his mother said, perhaps you write too much about this. Worrying that You know, she thought, well, it probably means nothingness, and perhaps you might get depressed. That's probably what she was thinking. She didn't say it. As long as these two seem to be separate, there is still no realization of the thought of the subduer. And as the note says, a lot of people very nicely don't translate this term as subduer. They translate it as sage, which is really easy to take. But I've ultimately got a really nice explanation from Buddha Guya, one of the three great expositors of Yoga Tantra, but I got this from his exposition, lovely exposition of an action tantra. I'm hemming and hawing. Which action tantra? Maybe it says in the note that it's someone who has restrained body, speech, and mind, which from one point of view might make subduer, who has subdued, you see, restrained. But anyway, one who dumb, this kind of dumb, restrains body, speech, and mind. It's a much more intimate translation. I'm saying both translations are good. You know my view on not dumping on other translations, but of showing why the other translation is good. Sage is nice and easy, reads well. So, Tsong-kha-pa advises, this understanding that dependently arisen objects and agents here could stand for objects, actions, and agents appearing to conventional valid cognitions are non-delusive. Anyway, what's really important here is just as it is, the understanding that the emptiness of inherent establishment is just as it is. And the note is very telling that in non-dual experience of emptiness, this non-dual experience cannot be described in words or in conceptual, it just says terms. So the quote from Tsong-kha-pa cannot be described in terms, that is to say in words, exactly as it is. When someone has realized emptiness directly, even that person can't describe how that person experienced it. That person's perception, that person's experience, exactly as it was. But as Tsong-kha-pa says, that doesn't mean it can't be described. It can't be expressed in words.
Jeffrey, may I
yes.
ask, just in this very point, is it ever suitable or realistic to say that any experience can be described exactly as it is?
Any direct perception. That's a good point.
Yeah, or even conceptual mind.
Yes,
The actual,
that's what I was trying to
appearance of
say.
mind.
Conceptual, even in one's own thinking, in one's own conceptual thinking. In non-dual experience of emptiness, as Khenso Yeshe Thupten described it, there are 5 types of non-duality. I'll just at least speak roughly of them and see if I can dig it up. Absence of the appearance of generic images. Tunji Nawa Meva in Tibetan. Tunji. Absence of the appearance of object and subject, that kind of subject. Object and object possessor. Yuljengi Nawa Meva. Nawa Meva. Absence of conventional appearance, Gunzo Kinawameva. Got 3, huh?
Of inherent existence, appearance of inherent existence.
Absence of Ranshingi Trube, Ranshingi Yoba, or Ranshingi Trube, no. 4. I usually get 4, and the 5th takes more time. He was really good on this kind of thing. So, with regard to, so it provides a real, with regard to an eye consciousness perceiving blue, how many of these are there? A lot of them. A lot of them. A lot of them. There isn't directly perceiving eye consciousness, obviously directly perceiving blue. There isn't any appearance of generic images or whatever one wants. Tunji no. There is an appearance of object and subject. There is an appearance of conventionalities. What else?
Inherent existence.
There is an appearance of inherent existence. Now, whether it could, this may not answer still, whether it could be the experience could be described in words, still may not answer that, but the absence, but the presence of these appearances and absence of them in the direct perception of emptiness at least speaks to a difference of type.
I can't
Yes.
Until now, it seems like we've been talking about just gaining the correct conceptual understanding of emptiness. And then this verse seems to jump into having a non-conceptual realization.
Oh, that's cool. Because at least the notes have brought up, exactly as it is. Now let me explain the note a little bit more. Like what Tsong-kha-pa brings up in the example, no one could describe the flight of a bird across the sky. And, one could think of somebody, pointing out, well, it flew from here to there, right? As if you couldn't point, the a goose flew from, like the geese do in my property in Virginia. They fly from one pond to my pond. My neighbors built a pond on my property. Not that they didn't ask me. One neighbor suggested it. And he built a small pond, and another neighbor, younger guy, said, well, I could make it bigger than that. And I said, yeah. And you see, one of my friends who visited, who's now working for Biden, he does public health, first aids, and now, anyway, big deal. Got interested in Tibetan medicine also and worked in Chiang Mai. Lived for 5 years in Chiang Mai. That's how I got to be a big deal. It was great. Wrote a book called War in the Blood. So I fly from that pond to and I've watched a goose or geese fly. And you point. And somebody with a fancy scientific equipment could draw. But geese leave no tracks in space, you see. If an animal walks across, they leave tracks. But there are no tracks in the sky. So, no tracks. So the person who put in the note, being myself, brought over a description of the, which comes from the grounds, the Bodhisattva grounds. And they're called grounds. A whole lot of people call them stages because it's uncomfortable. Those translators found it, even though the word is ground, or even earth, but ground. But I translate them as the Bodhisattva grounds because a lot is said about growing qualities, growing the Bodhisattva qualities based on the direct perceptions of emptiness as one advances on these grounds. So it feels awkward at first to call them grounds, but once you translate enough books calling them grounds, it's no longer awkward. So what does it say here? Just as it is. Tan-Dar-Lha-Ram-Pa. But it says the meaning found by ultimate valid cognition. Ultimate valid cognition has to be I can't extend myself ultimate valid cognition to even these very high levels of conceptual realization. And we're talking about very high.
So you don't think ultimate valid cognition can refer to an inferential understanding?
On the level of, the beginning of the path of, let's take it down to the meditative stabilization, which is a union of calm abiding and special insight at the beginning of the path of preparation. And all the way over the path of preparation is that ultimate valid cognition. I will say no.
Then what is it? It's valid cognition and the object is the ultimate.
Oh no, this ultimate valid cognition refers to the subject, and that'll be attained, I say, at the beginning of the path of seeing. And you can ask every geisha who comes by and defeat Jeffrey Hopkins by numbers. See if you can find anyone who disagrees with me. I think we'll need to look in the illumination of the thought. Yeah. We'll find our answer. Now, inexpressible by terms.
But in this verse, I mean, it's so strange because we've been going along kind of developing the correct intellectual understanding, and then whammo, it's as long as the understanding of appearance.
Yes, and you will see, you will see, I see that you have not skimmed this entire section that goes on chapter by chapter to determine when this occurs. I see you have not done your homework, which is concerned in chapter after chapter to determine when this occurs. Aha! And you probably have not read to the end of this chapter. Yes. So it's not referring to direct cognition of emptiness. All of these chapters are placing it, and so need we say that we're not straying into, of course, we're not straying into direct cognition. And this so-called intellectual goes very, very, very deep. Yes.
No, still inference.
Yes. Well, you see, inferential, remember, in is not mulling over words, right? And it includes this fantastic level. You know, it has a very broad level. Okay. Still no realization of the thought of the subduer. In which case, therefore, it's appropriate to strive at. Some people translate strive at as work at, beba, in Tibetan. Sorry, I should say first, in Tibetan, beba, work at, which is fine. It's good translation, very pithy. Strive at, work at. Some people translate beba as effort, but effort has a particular, I translate as effort, I already said that, has a particular meaning. It's included within the virtues. And of course this would be virtuous and so forth, but a different word is used, not effort, but just plain, a very pithy, common word, work at it. Work at methods, at methods. And this is not the word method, which usually or often the context is love, compassion, the altruistic intention to become enlightened. It's not that. Techniques, but it's that same word for finding the thought of the subduer. We got to go deeper. This thought has to do with the profound dependent arising. In other words, not just realizing dependent arising with valid cognition, but taking it to the point where the valid cognition of dependent arising juices up realization of emptiness itself. The force of realizing dependent arising with valid cognition enhances realization of emptiness. That consciousness itself, without involving any other consciousness, juices up realization of emptiness. So, this number 4, measure of having realized the profound dependent arising, is broken into 2 parts, and in the second one is particularly cute. And why it's so cute comes because he's Tan-Dar-Lha-Ram-Pa is giving a commentary on Tsong-kha-pa's furthermore. When Tan-Dar-Lha-Ram-Pa says that at the very end of this second one, that is not that one. Furthermore means another one. That's not the previous one. It's almost on the level of being silly. But he's going to give you another one that's not that one. He's going to give you one that's not the former one. It's so, he doesn't give it a name. It just splits me up. It's so, what do you call it? Pedestrian. It's pedestrian. It's almost snail-like.
It's funny because it almost makes it less clear.
Yes, exactly.
It's a bit strange. And then
Yes.
Is there some meaning behind, or what is?
Yes, right. Yes. It's like, and the second one doesn't say anything. It's like a put down. You try to milk it for meaning, but it turns out to have a lot of meaning. So it's like, have a good laugh and put it aside and don't try to milk it for anything. It's like, what does other mean? We should use that sometime. What does other mean? Not that one. Somebody says, I'm going to make another meal tonight. What do you mean by other?
May I ask one more question?
Yes.
It's just a terminology thing, because there's our distinction between conceptual and non-conceptual realization. So in English, we're accustomed to using this word sort of intellectual understanding, and I guess it's contrasted with experiential, maybe understanding. But would you say that the intellectual understanding actually equates with conceptual realization, or is it really more just like the wisdom arisen from hearing, but does it also extend to the wisdom arisen from reflection and meditation?
In terms of English, I think we've seen that intellectual is, and I think maybe we need to see that intellectual in English can be powerfully experiential. Powerfully experiential. And can be pathetically superficial. And as it can be in Tibetan. You know, can be just words, and just words and generic images, and just generic images with a, you know, with feeling, without feeling. And I think there's an infection from misunderstandings of the West that has crept into Tibetan teachings that relegate, you know, logic, words like doge. You know, doge sometimes in Tibetan means superficial, sometimes means very deep, and involving what I call wrenching giving up of superimpositions.
So basically you would say there's non-verbal intellectual thought.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Very much so. And we have to keep our eyes open for where this is talked about. Well, like when His Holiness talks about lightning in his chest, that it was, and yet he's still talking about pre-path of seeing. and that a pain stayed with him for days. So pain is feeling, and lightning, experiencing lightning means
His translating rikshay as rational awareness gives the very false idea that it's just blah blah words.
yes. And if you translate it as reasoning, Rick is reasoning. And so I think rather than trying to find some other, like translating it as emotional breakthrough, is to relearn what rational means. These English words. And to understand that these words shouldn't mean that. Not because they mean something different in Buddhism, but they don't mean that in the West, in the good West, in the old West, and people who've reduced the West to X, Y, X, whatever it is, and I just refuse to use X, Y, symbols. I just refuse to do it because that's not what we're talking about. And why I always talk about our adherence, emotional adherence, why I mix up the terminology when I talk about it, adherence to wrong views. And mix up talking about structural psychology, Lorik Dun, except for, which one is it? Amongst the Lorik Dun that don't figure into it. Not Nanglamange, appearing but not noticed. Lorik Trup, the six awareness and knowledge, and that progression and what it means to overcome superimpositions to the contrary, and why I use examples like trying to give up smoking, trying to give up going to the bar, trying to give up going to the sauna, and making fun of myself for my own shortcomings. Chocolate cake, chocolate. I don't need to give examples of the many types of chocolate that I'm thirsty for. Thirsty being the English version of the Sanskrit trsna, thirsty, trsna. We're we're in a sister language relationship with Sanskrit. Okay, we're 4 minutes behind the time. I was 4 minutes late, wasn't it? Okay, we're up to
This isn't a question.
What?
Just
Yes.
Jimpa or Rikshay uses probing awareness, which I think gives a much broader view of what that word means.
Yeah, that's good. And I'll praise it as good and refer to it as one of the ones that I praise as good but don't use. Because rikshay comes from rikpa, which is reasoning. And there's a whole lot of debates and so forth that have to deal with this is rikpa, but you're no longer doing reasoning. It comes from reasoning, but there are many stages where you're no longer doing the reasoning. And you can't understand them if you're, blah, blah. Yes. So that's why we have many translators and many books to read and certain types of texts. And one thing I do is when I'm translating a book for His Holiness, I'll even use 10 or 20 different words to translate the same term. Okay. Just as His Holiness said at Harvard, when I translated proof as proof, he said, food for thought. It was really good. Bye.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Right.